Have you ever walked out your front door and felt like someone was already waiting for you? Watering the lawn, leaning on their car, maybe waving just a little too eagerly? You think to yourself, well, that's nice, just being friendly. But then it happens again, and again. Different times of day, rain or shine. Same patch of grass, same smile, same uneasy feeling you can't quite explain. Now, most of us grew up in a time when neighbors looked out for each other. We left our doors unlocked, borrowed sugar without texting first, and sat on the porch just to catch up. But the world's changed a bit, hasn't it? And while being neighborly is still something to treasure, there's a point where friendly starts to feel like something else. Something that makes you lower your voice when you're on the phone, or peek through the blinds before stepping outside. That's the feeling we're going to talk about today. That gut instinct that whispers, something's off here. And if you've ever caught yourself whispering in your own kitchen or hesitating to open your blinds, you're not alone, and you're not imagining things. Today, we're going to talk about 5 clear signs your neighbor may be secretly watching you. Not out of friendliness, not out of concern, but out of something a bit more unsettling. And more importantly, I'm going to show you how to recognize it and how to quietly take back your peace. Let me tell you about Frank. He's 68, a retired firefighter, lives just outside of Milwaukee. Frank's a creature of habit. Early dinners, long evening walks, always in the same hoodie his wife gave him for their anniversary 20 years ago. Everyone in the neighborhood knows Frank. But Frank started to notice something strange. Every time he left for his walk, a man 2 houses down would just happen to be out. At first it was casual, checking the mail, sweeping leaves, poking around the garage. But soon, it didn't matter if Frank left at 6:30, 8, or even 10 at night. That neighbor was always there, always watching. Now, maybe you've experienced something like that too. You brush it off. It's just a coincidence. I'm being paranoid. But deep down, something feels different. That's your instincts talking. And after 60, your instincts aren't just old friends, they're survival tools, sharpened over decades. You don't ignore a dog barking in the night. And you shouldn't ignore that feeling in your gut either. Frank started keeping a little notebook. Nothing dramatic, just a small log. Date, time, what he noticed. Neighbor sweeping the driveway at 9:47 p.m. Again. Same car parked out front. Same guy leaning on the fender, pretending to scroll through his phone. Frank even installed a small camera near his front porch, not to accuse anyone, just to confirm his instincts. And sure enough, the footage showed it. The same man, showing up just minutes after Frank left, sometimes walking past the house 3 or 4 times in one evening. That's not friendliness. That's fixation. You see, one of the first and clearest signs that someone's watching you is that they appear whenever you do. They know your rhythms, what time you check the mail, when you walk the dog, when you take out the trash. And they don't just happen to be outside, they're reacting to you. As someone once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When someone is watching your routines, they're trying to take a piece of that power. But you can take it back, quietly and calmly. Frank didn't confront his neighbor. He didn't start a war. He just changed things up. He left at different times, parked in different spots, took the long way around the block. And when the pattern still followed, he brought his notebook and his footage to the local authorities. Calm, strategic, protected. And that's what I want for you. Not fear, not paranoia, but quiet confidence, awareness, strength. Now let's talk about another sign. This one is sneakier, quieter, but no less disturbing. And it has to do with the technology around you. Think about your street. How many homes now have those little doorbell cameras, or motion lights, or even full surveillance systems? It's common these days. But ask yourself, Where are those cameras pointed? Let me introduce you to Walter. Lives in a quiet cul-de-sac in Arizona, just turned 72, and still keeps his cactus garden neater than most kitchens. One afternoon, he realized that his neighbor's new security camera didn't just cover their driveway, it was angled directly at Walter's front porch. Now, maybe that was just how the bracket was mounted. Maybe. But then another camera appeared, this one capturing the side yard, the one where Walter's grandkids like to play. Then came the porch light, strangely bright, oddly aimed. And then Walter's Wi-Fi began to cut in and out when he stepped outside. At first, he told himself he was imagining it. But then his smart speaker would blink for no reason. His security system would beep at night, then reset. And every time, that same neighbor would appear the next day, casually asking how things were going. Friendly? Maybe. Or maybe not. You see, in this age, someone doesn't have to peer through your blinds to monitor you. They just need a lens, a signal, a quiet little device the size of a button. And the worst part? You start to feel like you're the one going crazy. You close the curtains more. You stop playing music aloud. You hesitate before laughing too loud. And slowly, your home, the place that's supposed to be your sanctuary, starts to feel like a stage you didn't audition for. That's the emotional toll. And if you felt it, I want you to know this. You're not losing your mind. You're not being paranoid. You're reacting to something real. And you can do something about it. Walter took a simple step. He walked his property, carefully, slowly. Looked at everything from the outside in. That birdhouse on the fence post? Fake. That new light fixture by the gate? A disguised camera. He changed his Wi-Fi password, updated his smart devices, and installed cameras of his own, ones that pointed outward, not inward. Not to spy, but to protect. And the shift he felt wasn't just in technology. It was in mindset. It was in dignity. In saying, this is my home, my peace, and it's not up for sale. When you're being watched, you don't need to confront anyone with anger. But you do need to reclaim your ground. Not just your physical space, but your mental space too. And the key is simple: awareness, documentation, and quiet action. No drama. No shouting matches over fences. Just quiet, firm protection of what's yours. Because here's what they don't expect: that someone in their 60s, 70s, or even 80s will be the one who outsmarts them. That the very generation they underestimate is the one who's lived through it all. Blackouts, landlines, station wagons with no seatbelts, and come out wiser, stronger, and calmer. So, if you've been feeling that quiet twinge in your gut, that sense of being seen when you didn't invite it, listen to it. Because your instincts might just be the smartest security system you've got. It's strange how the smallest things can suddenly feel out of place. A light that flickers when it shouldn't. A voice that echoes just a little too clearly through a wall. One moment you're sipping your morning coffee, thinking about what to make for dinner, and the next, you're wondering if someone else knows what you're having before you do. That's where we're headed next, into that uncomfortable space where neighbors know things they really shouldn't. And I'm not talking about the gossip over the fence kind of knowing. I'm talking about the kind that makes you pause mid-sentence in your own home because something just doesn't feel private anymore. Let me tell you about Maggie. She's 66, widowed, and lives in a small brick house with a rose garden that would make your heart swell. Every Tuesday she has a phone call with her sister in Florida. It's a little ritual: hot tea, soft jazz, and a long catch-up about everything from grandkids to garden tools. One week, they chatted about Maggie thinking of taking a quick trip to visit, maybe next month. A quiet thought, spoken only to her sister. The next morning, as Maggie was getting her mail, her neighbor, who had never once asked about her family, smiled and said, "I hear Florida's nice this time of year." He winked and walked away like it was nothing. But to Maggie, it was everything. Now maybe he'd overheard it somehow. Maybe. But when he later mentioned her new walking shoes, the ones she'd only ordered online and hadn't even worn yet, Maggie knew something was wrong. This wasn't small talk. This was surveillance disguised as conversation. There's a name for this kind of behavior. It's called informational creep. When someone gathers tiny bits of your life without permission, what you buy, where you go, who you talk to, and pieces them together like a puzzle. It's how control begins. Not with confrontation, but with collection. And let me be clear, this isn't about paranoia. It's about privacy. About that sacred space where your thoughts, your plans, and your choices live, and should stay, unless you choose to share them. Maggie did something incredibly smart. She tested the waters. One day, while standing near her open window, she mentioned on the phone that she was planning a big move to Oregon, something she had no intention of doing. 2 days later, guess who brought up how expensive U-Hauls are these days? That was all the confirmation she needed. So she got to work. Closed the blinds more often. Used white noise in the background when talking on the phone. Became more mindful of where and how she spoke. She even cleaned up her digital footprint. Tighter privacy settings, fewer updates, less sharing. And you know what happened? That neighbor stopped mentioning things. Not because he lost interest, but because the access was gone. Like a tap turned off, and he was left with nothing to sip from. There's something incredibly empowering about taking back your privacy. It's not about building a wall or living in fear. It's about knowing what belongs to you and keeping it that way. Now I want you to think for a moment. Has anyone around you ever known something they shouldn't have? Commented on a delivery you didn't mention? Brought up something that you only said inside your house? Those little moments matter. And if you're nodding right now, you're already halfway to reclaiming your space. Let me share another story with you. This one from Walter again, the cactus gardener I mentioned earlier. After he dealt with the surveillance cameras, he started noticing other odd things. The welcome mat, always slightly askew the way he liked it, had been repositioned, perfectly square. The potted plant near his entryway had been turned. His front door, which he always double-checked before bed, once showed signs of being left barely ajar. Not open, just off. He chalked it up to memory at first. Maybe he bumped the pot. Maybe he was tired. But the pattern continued. Small, almost imperceptible changes to the way he left things. Things only someone standing right at his front door could notice or touch. That's when it becomes real. Not just a feeling, not just a suspicion, but evidence. Physical, tangible. Proof that someone has crossed a line without your permission. Walter decided to run a simple test. He placed a narrow piece of paper just behind the welcome mat, barely noticeable. He taped a sliver of clear plastic over the edge of his back gate. Not security systems. Just old-school indicators that would tell him if something had been moved. Within a week, both had shifted. And not by the wind. When that happens, it's like a switch flips inside you. Because now it's not about being polite or giving the benefit of the doubt. It's about safety, about boundaries, about dignity. He documented everything, took photos, wrote down times, didn't confront, didn't accuse, just observed and prepared. And when he had enough, he filed a quiet report with local authorities. No drama, no confrontation, just facts. This is the kind of calm, deliberate action I want to empower you with. Not fear, never fear, but control. The kind that comes from living a long, wise life and knowing that protecting your space isn't selfish. It's necessary. If you've ever come home and thought something felt just a little off, I encourage you, trust that. Trust your memory. Trust your gut. It's been with you longer than any smart device ever will. You don't have to live with suspicion hanging over your head. You don't have to stop trusting people altogether. But you can, and should, create boundaries that are firm, clear, and quietly enforced. whether that's with a piece of paper under the mat or a journal you keep in your nightstand. Your home should feel like home, not a place you tiptoe around like it belongs to someone else. And if you're sitting there thinking, "I've never looked at my space that closely before," well, now's a good time to start. Walk around, look for patterns, check your comfort zones. Ask yourself what you've accepted as normal that maybe isn't. Because protecting your peace of mind doesn't require permission. It just requires you to notice and act. Somewhere along the way, we all learn to be polite, to smile when something feels awkward, to brush things off even when they feel wrong. Don't cause a fuss, we tell ourselves. It's probably nothing. But here's the truth. When something feels off, it usually is. And ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It just gives it more room to grow. Let me tell you about what happened to Maggie, the woman I mentioned earlier with the rose garden and the nosy neighbor. After she began setting boundaries, closed curtains, less chatter near open windows, fewer details shared online, things quieted down. For a while. But then, one evening, after a phone call to her sister where she casually mentioned thinking about joining a local painting class, something she hadn't told anyone else, she walked outside to find a flyer for that exact class tucked under her doormat. The hairs on her arms stood up, not because of the flyer, but because no one else knew, and no one else should have. The next week, her neighbor started asking questions. "You've got such a steady hand. I bet you're a great painter," he said, smiling that too wide smile. "Ever thought about joining a group?" Maggie didn't answer. She just nodded, smiled politely, and went back inside. But she knew. This wasn't just watching anymore. It was something deeper, something darker. That's the final sign, and maybe the most dangerous one. When their behavior shifts from simple curiosity to something more intense, obsession. Now let's be clear. We all have routines. We all like to know what's going on around us. But when someone starts weaving themselves into your life without your invitation, mirroring your schedule, referencing private information, showing up where they don't belong, that's not concern. That's control. This kind of behavior doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it starts as concern. They offer to bring your trash bins in, ask if you need anything from the store. But gradually, those small acts turn into constant presence. They want to know when you're leaving, who's visiting, what you're doing inside your own home. And before long, you start adjusting your behavior to avoid them. You change your walking route. You skip a trip just to avoid being noticed. That's not community. That's captivity. It happened to Karen. She's 70, lives in a quiet cul-de-sac, and is as independent as they come. She's lived alone for years, content and capable. But she had a neighbor, friendly, always chatty, who gradually became something else. He'd wave every time she left for work, no matter what hour. Started referencing things he shouldn't know, like her conversations on the phone, the kind of groceries she brought home, the weekend plans she hadn't told anyone about. One night, after mentioning to a friend over the phone that she'd be out of town, she came home to find a note slipped under her door. "Hope you had a great trip," it read in neat handwriting. She froze. That was the moment everything changed. Karen did the right thing. She didn't wait for it to escalate further. She began documenting everything. Times, dates, conversations, changes she noticed. She stopped responding to friendly banter, stopped allowing this person into her space emotionally, mentally, or otherwise. And when the neighbor stepped onto her property uninvited one afternoon, claiming he was just checking to make sure everything was all right, she filed a report with the authorities the same day. Now you might be thinking, well, that sounds extreme. But let me ask you this. What's more extreme, taking control of your safety or letting someone chip away at your peace of mind day by day? We've been taught to be nice, to give people the benefit of the doubt. But sometimes, being nice to the wrong person only gives them more space to harm us. And when someone crosses that invisible line between neighborly interest and personal invasion, your silence won't protect you. Only your action will. And action doesn't mean confrontation. You don't have to yell or accuse. In fact, the most powerful action you can take is quiet and strategic. You start by listening to your instincts. Those gut feelings you've earned after decades of life experience, they're more accurate than any device you'll ever buy. You trust them. You document what feels wrong. You secure your home, physically and digitally. You talk to a trusted friend, a family member, a neighbor you do trust. You make your circle smaller, but stronger. You don't isolate yourself. That's what the people who do this kind of thing want. They want you unsure, alone, vulnerable. But you're none of those things. You're alert. You're calm. And you're far from helpless. The law is on your side. Most states have anti-stalking laws, privacy protections, and legal resources for people who feel unsafe in their homes, even if the threat seems subtle. A pattern of unwanted attention is a pattern, and it matters. Your home is not a stage. Your life is not a show. And no one has the right to turn it into one. The truth is, most people will never experience this. But some do. And if you're watching this video, chances are you've felt it. Just enough to question it, just enough to wonder if you're overreacting. Let me reassure you, you're not. You're responding to a signal. And responding is strength. So here's what I want you to take away from this. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to question strange patterns, to close the blinds when something doesn't feel right, to change your habits if someone is watching too closely. You're allowed to walk your property and ask yourself, what's different today? You are allowed to say no, to friendliness that feels forced, to help that wasn't asked for, to conversations that cross the line. Your privacy isn't a luxury. It's a right. And keeping it intact is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. If this spoke to you, if something in your gut is still stirring, you're not alone. And you don't have to stay quiet. Share your story in the comments. You might help someone else see a pattern they've been ignoring. And if you haven't already, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel, Strong Elderly Life. We're building a community where experience, wisdom, and peace of mind come first. Because here's the truth, my friend. You deserve to live with the windows open and the door unlocked, not in fear, but in trust. You deserve to sit on your porch with a cup of tea, not a knot in your stomach. And if someone tries to take that from you, you don't have to fight them, you just have to outthink them. You've done it your whole life. You can do it now. You're not just surviving, you're protecting your sanctuary. Quietly, wisely, and with all the grace of someone who's lived long enough to know what really matters. Here's to peace of mind. Here's to strength without shouting. And here's to living your best, most protected life. One day, one step, one smart decision at a time.